welcome in our 1320 Kings insider and creator of the Kings Beat, the James Ham. James, always great to have you. Before we dive into trade rumors, before we dive into the San Antonio Spurs, we got a happy hour coming up tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Happy hour. The only way that you could be a part of the off-the-record happy hour. Now, one of us may have tried to convince James to record this specific episode. I'm not going to say which one of us it was, but I think deep down, we all know which one asked James to record the off-the-record happy hour. The only way you can be a part of it is by being a premium subscriber over at thekingsbeat.com. And James, tell us about your guest tomorrow, because I think this will get longtime Kings fans excited.
Yeah, I am super excited. So off the record with the Kings Beat Virtual Happy Hour, Part 11, The Columnist with Aileen Voisin. So Aileen is just like an NBA legend. Like, people who don't know her story, she's lived like 5 or 6 NBA lives. She covered the Donald Sterling trials when he up and moved the Clippers from San Diego to LA. She covered the 1992 Dream Team. She was like one of 6 reporters that were on the beat. Like, her career path and everything is wild. She's got some incredible stories. We'll sit back. We'll have a few beverages and let Aileen like just go, which I think is cool because, you know, when you're a reporter and your newspaper no longer does what you do or doesn't have, goes a different direction, you don't usually get to say goodbye. And I don't think Aileen got to say goodbye. So I think this will be a good way for her to kind of stretch her legs and have a good conversation with people.
Man, it's a throwback right here, man. I remember when you announced it, you talked about how like Brendan has no idea who and how I guess you could say influential she was during her time. Like, people can say whatever they want about Aileen Voisin. I mean, she was there for a long time, and she was like all over everything that had to do with the Kings for a long time. And you know, I don't disrespect that moment in time that she had with the Sacramento Kings. So to be able to hear her stories, hear her thoughts on some of the things going on today and back then, that's gonna be some good stuff, man.
Yeah, I'm excited. And of course, it's off the record, so people are allowed to, again, kind of like dive into whatever sort of topics they want to dive into. And, you know, like when we had Katie Christensen on, it was just amazing. Katie got really personal and talked about her life off the court. And, you know, we've had some amazing guests, and the happy hours are really cool. So people are missing out if they're not jumping on board for the happy hours. They're really cool.
I'll jump in and tell Aileen about the time she really, really pissed me off.
So
that's on the. You can only be a part of that by being a premium subscriber over at thekingsbeat.com. Just one of the many perks you get by being a premium subscriber over at thekingsbeat.com. And now that we're headed into trade season, James, this is the worst 8 days of the NBA season because you can essentially believe nothing you read in sports journalism right now. But let's start there with some of the rumors. Matisse Thybulle, that's where I want to start. Mark Stein reported about it. Keith Pompey backed it up, said it's not just Sacramento that's interested in Matisse Thybulle. The Golden State Warriors are interested in him as well, so they're monitoring that situation with Philadelphia pretty closely. Kenny and I are kind of all over the place with this one. What do you think about Matisse Thybulle and his fit and how that may work here?
Yeah, I mean, look, Matisse Thybulle is one of the best defensive players in the league. He's a 2-time second-team all-defensive player, and I think the only reason he's not a first team is because he doesn't score at all. And while you're giving guys credit for being defensive players of the year, you still do have to play offense, and it is part of being. It's kind of a well-rounded package that you have to have if you're going to be on that top tier list. This is a guy that could instantly step on the floor and make a tremendous amount of difference on the defensive end for the Kings. He'd be an upgrade over KZ Okpala, but sort of the same vein of player. He's shorter. He's only 6'5", but 6'11" wingspan. Super athletic, but he's a bad offensive player. And outside of playing defense, he really doesn't do anything else. And that's something that, a good team can support. But even Philadelphia has kind of had their run of it at this point. He's only playing 12 minutes a game this season for the 76ers, and it looks like they're thinking about moving off of him. I'd also point out that the 76ers are like $1.5 million, $2 million over the luxury tax. And there's potential for them to move Thibault in a trade that would relieve them of that luxury tax issue and make them not a repeat offender and just save them some cash. So it's something that, I think that the Kings should look at for sure. He's never played with a big man who passes like Sabonis. And so I think that would be interesting as well. Can he work as a cutter? Can he hit the open three? Shooting 33% on the season from three, but not a great 3-point shooter. But a really intriguing player at 25 years old on a budget deal that expires at the end of the year.
Here's the thing that I've been saying with this whole thing. Matisse Thybulle, like you mentioned, great defender. I like him as a ball player. If there's a way to get him without giving up much of anything, sure, go ahead and do that. But some of the names that we've heard floated out, Terrence Davis and some second-round picks. We talked a little bit about Rashawn Holmes. I'm just not really that interested in going to get a guy like Thybulle for much of anything. And I know you said that he's better than KZ Okpala as a defender. He might be, but you have KZ right here. Why would if KZ is 80% of the defender that Thybulle is, why give up anything and go get a Thybulle? Why not just play KZ Okpala?
Well, I think one of the reasons that you don't just play KZ is that, it's kind of the catch-22 in the NBA and in life, really. Like, there's always that job that you want, but they say you need more experience. And then you look at them like, how am I supposed to get experience if I don't get the job? And so it's always like a big catch-22. And I think that that KZ has, plenty of potential. He's 23 years old. He's played in some good systems as far as, Miami and now in Sacramento, where he's getting brought along the right way. But at the same time, like, the Kings are in a different category right now. They are the third seed in the Western Conference. And that comes with some great things, right? Everyone's super excited, but it also comes with, like, if you're going to go play for that team, you have to be able to step on the court and play today. And so any player that the Kings are going to chase at the trade deadline, it's going to come with that same caveat. Like, if you can't step on the floor, if you can't earn minutes, then you're not, like, why even pick him up, especially a guy on an expiring deal. Now, he does come with his Larry Bird rights, so he'll be a restricted free agent this summer, and you'll be able to, try to sign him to a contract after the season. But at the same time, like, I think Thybulle is just, like, he's a more experienced version of KZ Okpala, and KZ's just not ready, unfortunately, for the Kings and for himself. Like, you really wish he was, but he just hasn't had the NBA experience where Thybulle's played deep in the playoffs. Thybulle's played, he started on a great team for a couple of years now up until this season. So that's the biggest difference. And, again, he's 25 years old. He fits the age arc of this team. He's a guy that, if Keegan Murray becomes a 20-point per game scorer, along with Fox being a 25 and Domas being a 18 to 20, you can survive with a Matisse Thybulle scoring, 6 to 8 points a game. But he has to do some of the other things, or it doesn't work.
Do you feel like KZ Okpala fell short somewhere, and that's why he doesn't get consistent minutes?
No, I just think that you have such a small window to prove that you belong. And once the season starts, it's very difficult to put a player in and just, like, have him, grow into a role and all that stuff once you start winning. Like, if KZ was on last year's Sacramento Kings roster and was playing out the final 25 games of the season, he would have started 25 games. He would have got plenty of opportunity. But this year, it's about winning. And if you're going to take a gamble on one or two players that you're going to bring along, it's very clear that that's Keegan Murray and it's Davion Mitchell. Those are your young players that you're investing time and energy into in the game. Like, at practice and, with their development coach and all that stuff, these guys are all working really hard. But when it comes to game time, the Kings just don't have the opportunity to go feed a guy a bunch of minutes and hope that he figures it out on the fly, because they're already doing that with a couple of higher end guys, guys that are first round picks, top 10 picks, that they have to invest their time and their energy into. And those are the guys that you're going to allow to make mistakes, where KZ's not going to get that extra long leash to make mistakes.
What would you be willing to move to get somebody like Thibault? We've heard, I think it wasn't even reported. It was something that Tim Maxwell had just kind of thrown out there, just seeing what a deal would look like. But he talked about a couple second rounders and Terrence Davis. I'm not willing to give that up for Matisse Thybulle, but I don't know. What would you be willing to do for Thybulle?
Yeah, I mean, TD is like, I would give up TD for him, and that's not anything a knock on TD. I just think that, like, at the end of the day, you're getting a guy who is refined in what he does and knows exactly what his role is when he steps on the court. And we're still waiting for that moment from Terrence, right? And so, like, if I were doing the math, like, I think the Kings would probably be better off offering something like Alex Len and a couple of seconds, or a good second for Thibault and Jaden Springer. Jaden Springer is a young player, former first round pick, but who's not playing at all for them. And the biggest problem with Springer is that he's just eating their salary cap. He's the number that puts you over the top. So in that deal, you'd be trading out like a $3.9 million contract for basically like $6.4 million, and it works under the cap, but it would save them like $2+ million, which would drop them below the luxury tax. And because they are a repeat offender team, that luxury tax for them, every dollar over is probably at this point worth $5. And so they would enjoy getting like a $10 million tax break for losing a young player, and then maybe a second round pick or two. But again, there's interchangeable pieces here that the Kings have. You could go with TD. You could go with Trey Lyles at $2.6 million for Thibault. What you can't do is the Kings had to have a trade exception at $4.06 million, and you're only allowed a $100,000 buffer each way above with that $4.06 million. And unfortunately, Thibault makes, I think, 4.3. So he can't fit into that trade exception. Because in a perfect world, that's probably what Philadelphia would love. They would love to send out Thibault for nothing and a bunch of second round picks, or a couple of second round picks.
Essentially what Portland did with Jeremy Grant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that there was a way that they got up to a first round pick in that, but it was complicated. That's a very like crazy complicated deal.
And trade and that's just to be nerds here for a minute. That's essentially what trade exceptions are. Is it's just like a it's like a voucher.
Yeah, it actually it is. It's basically like a coupon.
Right.
So yeah, so it's called, in the NBA, they have simultaneous and non-simultaneous trades. So there is a trade that you do that just all of it's over and done with on that day, right? Well, there's also trades where you send out more salary than you bring in, and so you're able to create what are called trade exceptions. And this trade exception, that they have two trade exceptions right now, one for 4.06 and one for like 1.65. And the 1.65 is from the Marvin Bagley deal, and the $4 million deal trade exception is from the Tyrese Halliburton trade. So basically, it is just like a voucher that you use instead of a player, and it's a holdover from the previous trade. And, there are all kinds of ways, like both teams can create trade exceptions from the same trade. So a trade is usually looked at in NBA standards as, if we see a 6-player deal, that's probably more like 3 1- and 2-player deals. And so they, like, the way that they're put together is different than how they're reported and how they're looked at and viewed. You see this one big, like, 3-for-2 swap, and that trade is probably a 1-for-1, a 1-for-1, and a 1-for-0, and the 0 gets a trade exception. So they are very complex, the way the NBA works and how their salary cap works. So I think it's an interesting way that the Kings can help everybody out here and maybe free up some cap space for Philly. And, we saw Daryl Morey and Monty McNair. They literally sat in the stands together during the Sixers game. And then they made a joke about, oh, this is how deals get done. Well, wouldn't it be funny? That's realistically how a deal got done. when Morey was in town, they had conversations and then came back around to it 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, and consummated a deal to get Thibault in Sacramento. So yeah, it's interesting. I would point out too that I don't think Philly is going to pay Thibault next season. They have way too many other players on the books moving forward, and they can't. So they're going to lose him for nothing most likely, and it's a way for them to get something out of it right now.
The thing that I keep coming up with, James, which I'm not really interested in moving. Here's the thing, like, because I look at KZ Okpala different than I guess everybody else, right? Like worst case scenario, like I said, he's 80%. Even if you want to say Thibault's just a better defensive player, if KZ Okpala is 80% of Matisse Thybulle, what are you giving up anything for to go get Thybulle? And the thing that I always say is, who you're giving up something to get a guy that more likely than not, there may be some occasions here and there, he's not going to play for you in the final 6 minutes of a game. The same thing I said with Mason Plumlee. Who's coming off the court for Thybulle to finish out a game?
It just depends on the night.
Maybe Kevin Huerter. Maybe.
Well, it's going to...
Maybe Harrison Barnes, but what's the thing we always hear about with De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis? You can't have non-shooters out there with them.
Yep.
So
yeah, I mean, I get where you're going with that, but I would just tell you that, like, some players are so elite on the defensive end that they can actually impact everything. They can impact, like, KZ Okpala is good at what he does. He's not good enough to crack the Kings 9-man rotation. Thibault is good enough to crack the Kings 9. Thibault is good enough to start for the 76ers for the last 2 seasons.
Thibault barely cracks the Sixers rotation.
But the Sixers are up here, and the Kings are climbing, but they're still here.
And that's been my point, though, James. If a team that's trying to win a championship is looking at a guy like, we can win a championship without this guy, money be damned. Like, that's to me, that's not a good look. That's not a reason not to ever have him on the team. But a team that's trying to win a championship is looking at their roster and be like, we can do this without him. Let's move on from him. That's not a good look. And on top of that, Thibault's a hell of a defensive player. I saw him in that Atlanta series. Like, he was in that Atlanta series where they couldn't stop a nosebleed and they gave up multiple 20-point leads at home in Philadelphia. He was guarding Trae Young. He was guarding Kevin Huerter. Like, he's dope on defense. I'm not saying he's not, but I think this misnomer that he's Tony Allen, I think that's false. He's not Tony Allen. He's not that.
Yeah, I mean, like, Tony Allen is a relatively decent comp, but again, Tony Allen at least had some offensive game. Thibault really doesn't. And again, Thibault doesn't rebound. He doesn't pass the ball. He does get steals. I mean, he averaged, I think, last season 1.7 steals per game. And you're just thinking that if the right fit happens, if, some of these players, they get into a different system and some epiphany happens and the light bulb goes off in their head and all of a sudden they're better in their new situation than they were in their old situation, then, that's not a bad situation. That would be a good thing for the Kings if they found a way to, like, really maximize what he's doing. Where at this point, like, Philly's kind of in the same situation where they're trying to maximize Tyrese Maxey as a young player, and they're bringing along other guys that they're like, okay, we're not going to worry about him at this point, about Thibault at this point. I mean, he's playing 12 minutes a game, so I get that, but this is the first time he's played 12 minutes a game.
Let's dive into some other names that are out there, including ones that you and Sean and Brendan brought up on a recent edition of the Kings Beat podcast, available wherever you get podcasts from. We'll start with Darius Bazley.
Yeah, see, Darius Bazley, like, you talk about a guy who's lost his spot in the rotation. He's lost his spot in the rotation on a subpar OKC team. Sure, they're better this year, but they probably they're going to end up with, maybe a third, maybe 40, 50% the amount of wins that the Philadelphia 76ers are. Bazley is 22 years old, 6'8", 7-foot wingspan. He's had moments where he's been really good. He averaged 13.7 points and 7.2 rebounds per game a couple of years ago. And he's fallen out of the rotation as they go younger. And I think OKC has this thing that they went out and they collected all these first round picks, and they've done a pretty good job of using those first round picks. But the problem is that they always have more first round picks the next year because that's just their system. They're loaded on picks. and they start running out of roster spots. So last year is Isaiah Roby, who averaged like 10 points and 5 rebounds a game, and they didn't have a spot for him, and they had to waive him at the end of the year. This year it's Baisley, and Baisley's been in and out of the rotation all year long. But again, we're talking about a 22-year-old. He's had some ups and downs when it comes to shooting the three, but he's become a really, really good defensive player over his course of his 4-year career. Restricted free agent at the end of the year, probably won't cost you much to bring him back. And he's a guy that, again, this team lacks length and athleticism. Baisley is a guy that sometimes gets a little bit too much, like with heavy dribbling, and he tries to take things on himself. That just won't be the case in Sacramento. He won't be allowed to do that. And that's where you always have to worry. Like if we're looking at two young players in Baisley and Matisse Thybulle, and you compare them, like I really do think there's something about taking a good young player on a great team who understands that he's there to play a role versus a good young player on a bad team who has basically been able to do whatever he wants to do for the last 4 years of his career. And, so there's something to a guy already understanding his role and coming in and playing to his strengths. But I definitely could see Baisley being a guy that fits in really well in Sacramento. He's a guy that 2 years from now could really, really blossom into a special player. Sort of the way that Jeremy Grant took a long time to blossom, but sort of the same frame, the same athleticism, right there along the lines of Jeremy Grant. Just, he hasn't had the same productivity. And so you're hoping that if you're making that deal again, OKC's not going to be able to keep him this summer. They're just not. They're not going to, especially the way they're treating him this year. You can see where they're not playing him all that much. So if they could get something out of him, they probably would jump at it. And again, something is like that's where you talk about Alex Len and a second round pick, a future second round pick, and you could probably get Baisley. And the contracts match up and everything else, and
that's talking my language right there. That's talking that makes sense.
Well, that and Baisley is in the same situation though, where you can't use a trade exception. He makes 4.2 something, and it's within like 200,000, but it's not within 100,000 of that 4.06 million trade exception. So yeah, he's a guy that I like, and to be honest with you, the Kings have the assets to go get both of these guys. And if you're talking about the future and bringing in long wings, and also guys who are at this point they're depreciated assets, they're not playing major minutes on their team. So what are they going to cost you to bring back? Like realistically, well, you maybe a 2-year, $10 million contract for Thybulle, maybe a 2-year, $6 or $7 million contract for Baisley. Those are really, really good, affordable young players that have the potential to grow and be something different in the right system with the right point guard and the right shooting, the right big man that can set them up.
I like Baisley. I like his game. I'm with you, Ham, where I don't like the idea of when I did like Baisley. It was on an OKC team that was like trying to do nothing. So I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? And he's falling out of rotation now that they're kind of winning a little bit. But I like the idea of Baisley. I like what he can bring to the table, and he's a guy that I would take a chance on him if the deal was right. All this stuff is if the deal was right. Like I don't think any of these guys are somebody that you just go out and we got to get this guy, and we're willing to move anybody in the rotation to go get him. I'm not looking at Baisley, Thybulle, Josh Richardson. I'm not looking at none of those guys like that. But if the deal was right, I do like Baisley. I'm intrigued by Baisley, I should say.
Yeah, and in the chatty house, the Soul Shine band says no one wants Alex Len in trade. Hey, look, that as a player, you're correct, but as a $4 million expiring contract, that's not correct. Like Alex Len has value, and to be honest, like Alex Len and your $4 million trade exception, they're like Alex Len's salary is more flexible to go acquire a player because you can go, I think it's 25% up or down with his contract. But when it comes to like that trade exception is very locked in. There's only specific players that fit underneath that exact trade exception. And Baisley is a guy that I hinted at the other day, but didn't say a name. He's a guy that we've heard floated maybe for the last week and a half that the Kings maybe had interest in. And again, he makes a lot of sense. Just like Thibault to me makes a lot of sense.
They're moving Laker games around. They're preparing. They're preparing for LeBron to pass Kareem. They're moving start times around. Oh boy, it's gonna be a hectic week or so in the association with LeBron trying to balance not accidentally breaking the record in Portland or something like that, and making sure that he does it on national television. I guess they could potentially. We joked about the Portland game. They could move any Lakers game to national television to make sure that it's on TV when he breaks that record.
Yeah, easily.
Of course they will. Yeah.
Are you excited for this? Are you excited for this moment in basketball history we're about to see?
No, I mean not really, because it was inevitable.
Damn.
You know, like
It's still gonna happen.
No, I get you. I mean, I remember when Kareem broke it, so and like kept extending it. Like this is a player who like he has no intention on stopping. So like we're not going to celebrate every game that he reset the record. And I get it, it's a big one. But to me, it's like okay, isn't Karl Malone like number 3, like behind Kareem? So like I mean,
might be down to 4 now. Maybe he is 3. I don't know.
I don't get it. What's that got to do with anything?
Well, I mean, I just like I'm okay with it. Like it'll be fine for one night, but like you know, it is what it is. Like I'm just not.
Oh.
I'm not the like I like LeBron. I've been in the locker room when he won a championship. But to me, it's like okay, like this record was gonna fall. So,
yeah. Do you know where Kareem was when he broke the record?
Oh, I don't.
He broke it against Utah in Las Vegas.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, we were watching the clip the other day live on the show because that's what we do here on this show. We're like, wait a minute, swear that says UNLV. Like I can't. It was very confusing, but we're watching it to get like some context of what we're going to see next week, and we're getting a full game stoppage. We're getting an interview on the floor. We'll probably get the kids brought down to the court. Like it'll probably be like a 20-minute stoppage.
What year was it that he broke the record?
84.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I believe it was April of 84. I don't remember the exact date, but it was April of 84 that he broke the record.
Okay. Cool.
And LeBron will break it in the second week of February of 2023. There's a lot. I want to ask you about one more player. I want to ask you about Josh Richardson. That's a name Kings fans. I'm sure you've seen it here in the chat. That Kings fans are throwing at you, but I want an in-depth answer. So we're going to step out. We're going to come back. We'll talk about Josh Richardson. And then, of course, James, want to talk about the game tonight against San Antonio and what the Western Conference currently looks like and why this road trip is so important for Sacramento. So we'll do that when we return with James Ham here on D'Lo and Casey on Sacramento Sports Leader, ESPN 1320. I was like a minute early, Jesse. Sorry.
Hey, 2 things real quick. I saw my man Roland Fields in the chat, head coach over at Monterey Trails. That's my guy. Asked me if I was coming to the game, and I thought about it because I think they have a big game. I think they play Grant tonight. That's a good ass game, and I thought about it. Man, I got so many things I got to do here before I take this little trip. I don't think I'll be able to get there, but damn, man, I see y'all. I see y'all working over there, man. That's a good game in the Metro tonight, man. So big up Monterey Trails, and then to the Jacobs out there and the Aldrin Jays who have been telling me in the chat about context matters and Thibault locked up Trae Young in the playoffs and all this other stuff. First of all, Thibault's a hell of a defender. He's a hell of a defender. I've said that the entire time. I'm going to continue to say it because it's true. He's a hell of a player, a hell of a defensive player. In that series, Trae Young averaged 29 and 11.
What did he shoot though?
He shot like 30-some%. He shot 40%, 39 from the field, 32 from beyond the arc. That was his second worst shooting percentages in his playoff career. The 29 and 10 was the highest averages he's had in any playoff series in his career. Jacob, he shot 40%. I guess 29 and 10 doesn't matter because he shot 40%. 29 and 10 and winning the series doesn't matter because he shot 40%. Okay, Jacob. Okay. It don't matter. It don't matter. Aldrin, it don't matter. And beating Philadelphia 3 times in Philadelphia, it don't matter. This is why we have a problem with people who follow basketball now. Because a guy averaged 29 and 11 and won a 7-game series against the number 1 seed, beating their team 3 times on the road, it doesn't matter because he shot 40%. Okay. Okay, guys. Thank you.
He's a little heated.
He's all fired up.
No sense.
I will also tell people in the chatty house that I'm slightly older than you think I am, and I was very much old enough to see Kareem break the record. If it's 1984, yes, without any question. So I was just looking up Thibault defensive stats. I'm not going to use this year because this year is he's just not playing that much. But if we go back to last season, he's a negative 3.1 overall. He held his opponents to 10.5% lower from behind the arc than standard. Greater than 15 feet, 10.1% below their average. Yeah, I mean, he's not going to block a shot. I mean, he averages 1.6 and 1.8% above at 2-pointers and less than 6 feet. But, like, this is a lockdown perimeter defender. Hang on, was that last?
He's a hell of a... And in that series, there was also Ben Simmons guarding Trae Young. So to sit up there and say Thibault locked him up and put him at the 40%. Jacob always want to talk about context. Keep the same energy, buddy. Ben Simmons was also guarding Trae Young a lot of that time as well. So give the credit to him. And I would never say I locked somebody up if I allowed 29 a night and 11 assists.
Well, I can tell you overall in the playoffs last season, he averaged a negative 2.4. Is that what season, last season or the season before?
Two years prior.
Okay, so the 2020-21 season?
Because last year, I don't even think he played. Like, he couldn't even get off the bench.
He played 9 games in the playoffs last year, but I don't know how much he played.
Y'all really got Kenny fired up over this Matisse Thybulle thing.
They saying stupid shit. The guy averaged 29 and 10, and they won the series, and Thybulle locked him up. Okay.
I'm still confused on your 80% of, because, you know, like Michael Jordan, well, like 80% of Michael Jordan is what, like Vince Carter. Like I'm still taking Michael Jordan.
Matisse Thybulle is not the Michael Jordan of defensive player.
No.
Okay, so there's that.
But he is probably the best perimeter defender. Yeah, I mean, for like 2 years.
He's a very good defensive player.
Yeah,
very good. There's no bones about that. Very good defensive player.
Yeah, I think the Kings at some point they have to start trying to get that extra 20%. That it just is what it is. They need that extra 20% player. Because that's what it means when you get better. You need, you don't need the 12-point per game Kevin Huerter. You need the 15-point per game Kevin Huerter, the 20% better version. Mm-hmm. Rashawn Holmes, perfectly fine at 13 points and 7 rebounds, or 14 points and 8 rebounds, whatever it was a year before. You got way more than 20% better when you went with Sabonis. So,
Holmes is not 80% of Sabonis. Like, he's not.
No.
So that wouldn't be something that I would say.
Still like 70, though. I mean, if you factor in everything,
he's not.
Hang on, guys. Hang on. Y'all really got Kenny fired up over the Thybulle thing.
They saying dumb stuff, man. Come on, man. What you want me to? This guy Trae Young wins the series, averaging 29 and 11, and he played awful because of Matisse Thybulle. What kind of nonsense is that?
I don't know.
They talk about context matters, right? What part of context is winning the series? Where does that matter in the equation?
Don't talk to if you see Kenny at the airport. Don't bring up Matisse Thybulle to him. It's gonna end bad.
This has gone past Matisse Thybulle. I'm talking about Trae Young at this point.
I'm not sure why we're talking about Trae Young, but that's just the evolution of the conversation in the chatty house, I guess. You can watch it, so you could be a part of the chatty house. You too can spend commercial breaks getting screamed at by Kenny Caraway at youtube.com/ESPN1320 and twitch.tv slash
I love everybody in the chatty house though, man. Even if
Even Beam Team.
Beam Team cool with me. I don't have no problem. He doesn't like me. Like I have him in his feelings, but he don't bother me. Beam Team is fine. So is Jacob. I appreciate everybody that supports the show, man. And I love having the banter back and forth. It's all good.
CJ says, remember when Casey hated Franz Wagner?
And hated Franz Wagner. He went to my University of Michigan Wolverine.
That's right. He didn't hate Franz. He hated Scotty Barnes. That's who we hated. That's who we hated. Hammer, before we get to tonight's game and the overall look of the Western Conference, I want to throw one more name at you. And obviously, we're going to talk a lot more about this tomorrow and the next day and until Thursday has come and gone. And that's Josh Richardson. I don't think there's a report or a rumor outside of they may look to move Josh Richardson. I mean, it's a bad basketball team. Like they could do a lot of things, but it's a name that many people have brought up. Many Kings fans have brought up over the last couple of weeks.
Actually, it's something on the podcast last night, and I wrote about, which is going up right now, if it hasn't already gone up in the last few minutes, that Sean Cunningham reported last night on the pod that his name has popped up in discussions around Sacramento. And like, look, Josh Richardson is kind of like the perfect fit. He's kind of, he's a 29-year-old guy who has bounced around the league a little bit, but I think he's bounced around the league. It's kind of interesting. Like I haven't met Josh Richardson, so like I'm not going to put like who he is as a person or anything else because I don't know him. But like he's never been someone who's been on like the outside looking in and or a guy that's been like in trouble or anything. But the fact that he's played for 4 teams in the last like 4.5 seasons is usually a little concerning. And then when you look at his contract, that's kind of why. His contract is the perfect contract that matches up salaries. And so Boston had too much depth at the wing, so they traded him for Derek White, and the salaries matched up, so it was an easy swap. The difference is at 29 years old, he knows exactly who he is and what his job is and everything else. He's a 3-and-D wing. He's the guy that basically the Miami Heat didn't want to give up in the Jimmy Butler swap and held up the deal for months and months and months because of it. And then, he's just kind of bounced around, and he's going to take a little bit more to get because his contract is at $12 million. If you want to take on more salary, the Kings could do that. They could do something like Terrence Davis and Alex Len and a couple of second-round picks, and you could probably end up with Josh Richardson. But you could also do something like if they'd be willing, you could swap Rashawn Holmes straight across for him. And he's a rental. He's an expiring contract at the end of the year. You'd have Larry Bird rights, which means you could go above the salary cap to retain him. And he's a player who, again, is lost value in the marketplace. Like his value probably isn't $12 million anymore. It's probably closer to $7 to $8 million. But could you lock him up afterwards? And could him and Harrison Barnes be like a really nice forward combo for the next couple of years for you? And I think the answer is yes. It just depends on like what exactly the San Antonio Spurs are looking to do. They usually have a really high value placed on their own players. And so you're kind of worried, like, are they going to ask for too much? Like even 2 seconds is probably too much for Josh Richardson.
You think so? You think so? I think, because I'm with you, Ham. I think Josh Richardson, now, of the 3 guys that we talked about, this is the guy that fits what they need and what this team style is on both sides of the floor the best, in my opinion. And I really like this game in Miami. He did some good things. I thought in Philly and Dallas, he kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. I didn't think Dallas really knew how to work with him. Same thing as Boston. But I like Josh Richardson's game a lot. And if you talk about something like 2 seconds, I don't know, man. I feel like that might be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what it costs. I mean, the Kings have extra seconds in 2023, 24, 25, and 28. So between now and 2029, they have like 11 second-round picks. Two of those are tied up in the Herder trade because if their first never gets relayed in 2026, it becomes their 2026 second and their 2027 second. So that's a little complicated, but like they have plenty of second round picks, and we've already seen that they do not value their second round picks at all. Like what they've done with their second round picks over the last couple of years. I mean, they traded one for Sasha Vezenkov, not knowing whether he's ever going to come over or not. They traded the other one just to move back to another year last year. So like they don't really value them. Even on draft night, they typically haven't been using them, or they used the two on Jemias and Robert Woodard, but they didn't even keep those guys the following year. So anyway, I would look at like this is an opportunity for the Kings to add realistic veteran depth that can walk in and actually improve your 8 to 9 man rotation. Like, is he the small forward version of Mason Plumlee? Maybe. I don't know if I'd put him as that good of a player, but as far as the fit for Sacramento, I think again, if you could add two of these guys, then you're really, really improving your 9-man, 10-man rotation, and you're setting yourself up to really be a strong contender for like maybe a home playoff series like down the stretch.
You a second ago said, could Josh Richardson and Harrison Barnes be a forward combo moving forward for the next couple of years? Did you mean Keegan Murray? Or
No. I meant at the small forward position. Like if you're going to do a 3 forward rotation of Keegan Murray, Harrison Barnes, and Josh Richardson, I think you're actually pretty solid. Like, is that incredible? It really does depend on what happens to Keegan Murray, how good he gets. But I meant as sort of a platoon at the 3 with Harrison.
I got you. James Hams reports Harrison Barnes is going to be here for the foreseeable future with the Sacramento Kings.
Well, we don't know. I mean, again,
I hope so. Man.
But adding a piece like that makes a lot of sense. And then what you do is you get to the draft and you're drafting, if you hold on to, a 3, 4, 5, 6, you're going to be drafting between like 18 and 23 anyways. That's when you take a stab at a really like developing like small forward that you can bring along behind these guys and develop slowly and make sure that he's ready to roll in 2 years.
And Josh is more 2-3 rather than 3-4.
Yeah, he's 6'5". He's 6'5" with a long wingspan, but he's more of I'd say at this point he's more of a 3 than he is a 2. Yeah, I mean he's kind of like what you hope that Glenn Robinson III would be. That's who he is as a player. I mean, they're very similar style of player. Maybe Glenn Robinson III has better hops, but like I think Josh Richardson's a more refined player, better defender.
Yeah. Just for the people in the chat, because they keep asking, James, do you want to speak on the possibility of Gary Trent Jr. or OG Anunoby coming to the Kings? I think they're both slim to none, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the opportunity is going to be there. Like, do I like Gary Trent? Yeah, but like, where would he fit? You already have so many shooting guards on this team, anyways. When it comes to Herder and Monk there, and Fox can play the 2, and so I'm not really looking at that position. If you can get OG Anunoby, I've had someone tell me like I think there's conflicting views of OG within the walls of the Sacramento Kings. I've had one person tell me that they think he would change everything. That he changes the culture of a team. That OG Anunoby steps on the floor and becomes like your defensive catalyst and still has enough offensive game to hold his own, but he could change the direction of the team as far as on the defensive end. And they would be willing to give up a whole lot to have that happen. I've heard other people aren't nearly as high on him, that they don't know how he'd fit offensively, and like, sure, he's a great defender, but can one guy change everything? Like, kind of deal.
No, the Kings culture is just fine. We're past the change culture thing. The Kings are in pretty good shape in that regard. Yeah. I understand they need to get better defensively, and that's what we should be talking about at this point.
And I don't think I'm not saying like the culture is bad. I mean, the defensive culture is still bad. It's still not. There's still not a buy-in. You're still waiting for the moment where this team can withstand a major run. Like what we saw against the Timberwolves the other night was one of the best defensive efforts this team has had. But like it's so forced in order to get that. Like that's not who they are yet. And a guy like that would quickly turn who you are. Like you can still be a great offensive team, but on the defensive end, he's going to demand specific things. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And he's a great individual defender. Like he can change a lot of things. But the problem is with OG, first of all, he blew out his knee in his senior year or whatever year, his final year of college. It wasn't his senior year. I think it was his freshman year. Right at the end, he blew out his knee. And that's why the Kings didn't take him. They took Harry Giles instead, which was a mess. But they got to the 20th pick, and they had Giles and they had OG sitting there, both who were recovering from knee injuries. OG ends up playing like almost the entire season, his rookie season. I think he missed 10 games total. And Harry Giles didn't play at all and then has barely played since. But when it comes to OG, there's some injury history. There is the fact that he's got 2 years remaining on his contract after this season, and it's very reasonable. But at what point is he going to want like huge money? And that's something that the Kings have to be cognizant of. You don't want to become the Atlanta Hawks. And, the Atlanta Hawks, like they built this gigantic team and then they kept adding all these pieces in free agency like Bogdanovich and Gallinari, and they went out and they traded for Clint Capella, and they spent all this money. Well, then their young players that they were grooming to be part of the future, they all came up for their contracts. And it's like, okay, what are you going to do now? You got to pay John Collins. You got to pay Trae Young, but you already signed these other guys, and now you don't have any cap space. And you're looking at, massive luxury tax bills in order to have a team that's not going to be a playoff or a title contender. The Kings have to be cognizant of the same thing. Like they know now that Sabonis is looking like a supermax player or close to it. Like at a minimum, you're looking at $30 to $35 million a year for Sabonis when he comes up for contract after next season. And so you have to plan out ahead. And if you're going to add a guy like OG, can you get Sabonis and OG and De'Aaron Fox under the same under the same salary cap with Kevin Huerter, with whoever's playing other positions? You really do start running out of money. And then, oh, by the way, Keegan Murray is going to be up for his contract. So you have to think about these things 2, 3, 4 years out and how they project.
No, it doesn't matter because the cap's going to go up. That's what everybody always says when they want to.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't matter. No, it's not a bad cap. The cap's going to go up. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Well,
like the
Supermax
salaries
players
don't go up with that.
Well, Supermax players get 30% of the salary cap. So, yeah, that's what you're looking at. That's why Sabonis will be wise to wait and get his contract when he gets his contract. So, yeah, there's a lot that goes into roster build, and that's why they're looking at guys like Thibault and Darius Bazley. Like, you give them a 25, 30 game run. Do they fit? Do they not fit? Do they have the length that you want? Can they play within the style of offense? And if they can, you have bird rights to them, and they're probably going to be affordable anyways this summer. So it's a really good way to build out your roster without extending yourself on a Ben Simmons or John Collins. Like John Collins, you're looking at $80 million over the next 3 years after this year. Like that impacts everything else you do from then on. Mm-hmm. So when you don't have like options, that's one thing. But when all of a sudden you start having options because you're a better team, you have to think really wisely about your money.
Well, the one thing about that though, James, and tell me if I'm wrong about it, is it's more about what you think in this case Vivek and the other owners are willing to spend over the luxury. Like if we're going to go out that far to like Sabonis and Keegan and Fox and all this other stuff, like this isn't a hard cap situation. Like you can keep everybody you want, but now you get into a luxury tax situation. And the argument before was always, what you going to spend $20 million in a luxury cap or whatever, or luxury tax or whatever it was at the time for a team that could win only 30 games, 32 games or something like that. Now, hopefully, if things continue to progress over the years, you're talking about doing those things for a team that has an opportunity to be in the Western Conference Finals or something like that. Like that's the hope. But the thing about it is you can always pay whatever you want as long as you're willing to pay it, if that makes any sense.
Well, in theory, yes. And you miss the other part, as long as you have the money to spend. Like that's a big thing. So
right.
Joe Lacob has more money than Jesus, so he just goes ahead and spends whatever he wants, right? He doesn't care. but that's not the same way it is in Sacramento. I mean, like, look, I know, like, in the first 4 months of the pandemic, the Kings lost over $100 million, like, as a franchise. So where were they at, like, a year and a half into the pandemic? Where are they at when there's no one in the seats and all that stuff? So, like, all the concerts canceled, all that stuff. Like, they literally lost. Like, I don't even know what the estimation would be, but it's got to be close to a $500 million or more. So, like, yeah, we can expect these guys that will, they can come up with the money, right? But it's also a business, and these guys have to do what's right for them as well as do what's right for you know the community and everything else. And then I'll even say this, like, look, you have to, like, gauge these things, like, how is everything going to work out now, and what's it going to look like in 5 years or 3 years. And like Rory is mentioning in the chat that the Kings are like 18 million under the luxury tax, and that's fine, but one player can eat up that 18 million super fast and put you in a situation that's uncomfortable in 2 years. And you hope that the salary cap is supposed to skyrocket. Supposed to go to 150, I think, in 2 years. But then they think that it'll go even higher than that with a new television deal. But that's if the new television deal comes through the way that they think. And
expansion.
Yeah. So you have to be cautious. And again, you don't want to get in a position where your team is really good, but they're not great. And you don't have the ability to be great because you don't have the flexibility to go add that one piece that makes you great. And, the Kings haven't been there forever, and that's why they haven't spent all of their money every single year and just, like, blown it up. But, like, the first year I covered this team, they had a $58 million payroll. It was the lowest payroll in the NBA for the previous 2 seasons. They traded for Marquise Daniels at the trade deadline just to get to the salary floor, which was mandatory. They spent nothing. And so while you can say that, the Kings don't spend as much as some other teams, what's 134 million minus 58? I don't know. That's a lot. That's like $76 million more than what the Maloofs were spending from 10 years ago. So, yeah, it's a lot of money.
Hey, the Kings re-sign Sabonis, have Fox, re-sign Keegan Murray, gets reported on Sports Sunday with Sarah Hodges, and then they shift. In related news, River Cats ticket prices are up 250%. They have to find the money here to pay for these guys.
Yeah. Or they just, like, tear down the stadium and put up condos there to make money, to develop something because they need the money. You don't want to extend yourself so far when you don't know what you have. Like, we're talking about, this is season one of what should be or could be or hopefully will be a 5 to 8 year run, right? But it's still year one. You haven't even got to year one. You haven't got to the end of it. So show me what you are at the end of this year. Show me what you are at the end of next year. Are you a team that's building? Are you a team that's solidifying themselves as a top tier team? And if you're not, like, what changes do you have to make? And so I get the cautious approach.
Every game is big with the way the Western Conference is shaking out right now, with the Clippers emerging as that team we thought they would be before the season started, with the Golden State Warriors finally getting their stuff together. I would argue, James, probably an argument counter to what a lot of people think when you have that, the 2-game stretch against the Minnesota Timberwolves, and you look ahead to the rest of the trip. It's those are 2 big games against Minnesota. I'd argue these games coming up now are just as big, if not bigger, because they're games that you just can't afford to lose. The San Antonio Spurs are a 14-win team. You've got a Pelicans team coming up that have lost 9 straight. You've got an Indiana Pacers team that has lost like 11 or 12 out of 13 or something like that. And it feels like the Kings on a night-to-night basis, even here on the road against bad teams, are in you've got to win these games type situations. This feels like a big game for the Sacramento Kings, a nothing game for the San Antonio Spurs, but it feels like a big deal for Sacramento given the way the Western Conference is looking right now.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, it's a road trip. You have to forget that you're on the road. You have to forget where you are in the standings. You have to be present in each and every single one of these games because, like, it does get tougher. Like, the Kings have, I think, coming into this stretch, it was like the 21st easiest schedule remaining. But when you get done with these 7 games, that's not going to be the case, because a lot of the reason why your record, your future record strength of schedule against is so weak is because of this stretch. Once you get past this, it's going to get more difficult. Your win percentage against is going to go way up. And the final stretch of the season, it's going to be a dogfight. And they need every single bit of wiggle room that they can create for themselves. And that it's literally just taking care of business. They've got, 5 games left on the trip. Like, I don't want to say they have to go 5-0, but they have to go 5-0. Like,
I want to die. That's what I said earlier.
They got to go 4-1. They got to go 5-0. They've got to find a way to get, like, if you go 5-0, you're 12 games over 500. All of a sudden you're legit. That's legit. You will have a good lead, because one of those games will come against New Orleans. One of those, you're pushing other teams down. Even the split against Minnesota was spectacular. Like, that really hurt Minnesota. Look where they're at in the standings versus where they were the day before. And, like, there's a desperation there. So,
see, and that's the thing I'm actually a little nervous about this is, you guys are both pushing for them to go 5-0 over this stretch because of the teams that they're playing. And I completely agree. The one part where I differ from you, Ham, a little bit is I don't think that 5-0 creates much separation. I think the way that the Clippers are playing now, it might create separation with, say, like Utah or New Orleans or some of those teams. But I'm looking at Phoenix. I'm looking at Golden State, LA. Kind of got my eye on Dallas. We'll see how that shakes out over the course of the next week or so. I think it's important to just kind of not lose ground when you're playing bad teams, which would make that Dallas series next week, if you drop some of these games over the next week, just absolutely massive. KC, safe travels to Baltimore. Kenny will be back with us on Monday. James is going to be kind enough to hang out with us for the next couple of days.